So, today I want to talk about quiet quitting. It seems these days I can't go a single day without seeing another article about this phrase quiet quitting. It's become the new buzzword, and articles are filled with corporate propaganda trying to fight back against the phenomena. So, what is it? Well, in a nutshell, it actually has nothing to do with quitting one's job as the name implies. Rather, it is essentially doing one's job normally and working within prescribed hours. The reality of anti labor structures over the past decades have made it so that bosses expect far beyond negotiated expectations from their employees. And the media has even outlined it as a positive to hustle, while missing the cultural norms and nuance of the origins of that word in relation to work. This corporatized version of hustle has led to people working far beyond their scheduled hours, performing free labor for the company, and often taking on tasks that go far beyond the expectations laid out in any employment agreements. The thing is, we already have a phrase for this already. It's called work to rule. Work to rule is a well tested union strategy that has been used to show the level of generosity that employees often give their employers to keep up with unrealistic demands or outputs. This is done by performing to the exact standards of a contract or following the exact expectations laid out by a manager or employer and giving nothing more. In most cases, employees are giving much more than they have to or should. And now, when we look at this phrase, rather than placing blame on the employer as it should be, this term quiet quitting shifts the focus onto employees and makes them guilty and responsible for doing only what is expected of them. We need to reframe this to place blame properly. And if we explore this in this type of way, we should also note that quiet quitting, as it's being called, also is not allowing wage theft to happen. Anytime a boss asks you to work outside of prescribed hours without pay, that's wage theft. Anytime a boss demands you to check your email outside of work, that's wage theft. Anytime you're asked to take on tasks outside of your deemed role and often outside of your salary range, that's wage theft. If you're working overtime and not getting paid overtime hours, it's wage theft. And anytime you're asked to work through your break, that is also wage theft. All of these ideas that have become seen as normal under corporate hustle culture need to be addressed in terms that acknowledge the culpability of companies rather than putting the blame on workers for working their wage. Now, if you're someone sitting here defending this corporate hustle culture because you enjoy overworking yourself, I have two words for you: healthy boundaries. You are not doing yourself or anyone else a favor by providing free labor for companies in the hopes to become one of the good employees in the eyes of your employer. Maybe you get to be the one that gets to experience survivorship bias and gets promoted, but more than likely you will join the ranks of millions of other employees who hustle themselves into burnout only to find that you have had your free time and livelihood trampled by a company who barely cares if you live or die and would replace you in a heartbeat. You want proof? Take a look at how this has been framed by the media on both sides. The articles critical of employees consistently frame employees as not working hard enough. Here's an example where we find what employees should do instead of setting these healthy boundaries. We have here that while quiet quitting may help ease burnout in the short term, it's not a long term solution. Workplace experts tell CNBC Make It. Here's what they say you can do instead: be efficient. If you're going to adopt some level of quiet quitting, then the hours that are spent at your job should be maximized and efficient. Oh, okay, what else? We should take ownership. People who engage in quiet quitting often become bitter and resentful towards their employers, using it as a way to get back at their company. Quiet quitting is not going to be sustainable in the long term, however, as it doesn't give a greater sense of purpose of appreciation at work. And finally, you should talk to your boss, not to social media. While some workers have taken to social media to express why they're quitting or quiet quitting, workplace experts advise that they should be speaking to their boss instead. You could say to your boss, I don't have the sense that I'm doing a good job, that I'm delivering what you want. So when that happens, you can let me know. So the solutions, according to them, are to work harder during your work hours to make up for the time you would have worked outside of your work, stay positive and happy with your employment and don't be disgruntled for being treated poorly, find greater meaning in your job no matter how poorly they treat you, and of course, talk to your boss because they will be completely reasonable as long as you are submissive and blame yourself for the problem. Spoiler warning, don't do any of this. Either they will try to coerce you into selling out your coworkers, or you'll end up on the boss's list one way or another. Instead, talk to your coworkers and find out if they have similar concerns, and most definitely, work to rule. And in another article that I want to take a look at, this time defending employees, let's find out who they blame instead. So we have here an article that is discussing the idea of quiet firing. We have here a tweet from one Bonnie Dilber, who is a Seattle-based recruitment manager, who talks about this concept of quiet firing. And the whole way through, it talks about the incompetence of managers. Dilber suggests companies should be looking at their management practices and identify places where people are being quiet fired by poor managers who don't want to do the work to support, train, and coach their teams, rather than being concerned by quiet quitters. So in this context, they have taken this notion of quiet firing, which was created kind of as a retort in order to call out companies for their malicious practices of underpaying, overworking, and mistreating certain employees in order to push them out the door without having to pay them unemployment wages, and have blamed the lowest levels of management for this. Now, I'm not saying that managers can't be terrible to employees. It happens all the time. But remember those individuals who got lucky enough to get promoted from overworking themselves? Those are the people being blamed instead of the entire corporate structure and capitalism. It's not the executive's fault. It's not the shareholders' fault. It's not the system's fault. It's just one bad manager in this instance. These types consistently shift the blame as low as they can down the ladder instead of taking responsibility for who gives these low-end managers the ultimatums and quotas that are then demanded of workers. The fact remains, it is systemic, it is capitalism, and it is the way that corporations are run from the very top that make and incentivize these processes. To blame workers for trying to work normal amounts of hours, or to even blame the lowest levels of management for trying to implement policies that came from above, is ridiculous and absurd, and they will constantly shift the blame away from themselves in order to create an illusion that it's everybody else's fault. If only there was one good manager to convince all these employees to just work harder, we'd be fine. If only these employees would just work harder, we'd be fine. We want compliant, obedient workers. Now, as long as we live in a world where our wages and earnings are stolen from us daily through record-shattering corporate profits and stock dividends, we really do have no incentive to give a single moment of our time more than what is required in our labor contracts. If you do want to do good work outside of work hours that will increase your pay, consider helping to form a union. If you form a union in your workplace, all of your coworkers can join in the bounty of that pay raise. Or better yet, try to create a worker co-op where you'll all have investments in the company because it will all be your company. The workers will control the company itself. And then you don't have to worry about creating these types of incentives through very demeaning means. And also, I have news for these companies if they think quiet quitting or work to rule is such a big deal. Imagine the shock to these companies' executives and how their faces will look if we implement some of the other old strategies of unions, such as slowdowns or go slows, where workers can often slow the pace below minimum standards and quotas. Maybe if this happened, we wouldn't have Amazon workers urinating in bottles and UPS drivers passing out from heat exhaustion. Imagine instead a sit-down strike, where employees took over their facilities and flat out refused to work. Instead of individual people not complying with wage theft as we're seeing right now, we could have massive movements slowing down the labor force even more. If these employers are startled and scared of what's happening when individual employees refuse to work extra for free, then imagine their reaction to every worker agreeing to work less than the bare minimum or absolutely shutting down workflow. Imagine the effects that it will have on corporate profits, and imagine how quick it'll get a reaction. These are the powers of organized labor, and it's time we implemented them more often and more harshly to our own benefit and ends. So with that said, if you've enjoyed what you've watched here today, consider liking the video, subscribing, and leaving a comment, as well as joining my Discord where we have political conversations like these. If you're in a financial place to do so, and only if you're in a financial place to do so, please do consider supporting me on Patreon, especially as political content like this can often be demonetized on YouTube. The links for everything that I mentioned are in the description down below. With that said, my name is Enriquez Terra. Thank you so much for watching.